Today we're going to take a look at what we call integers. I'm going to show them to you on the number line. If you had a number line, here I will have 0. To the right of 0, these are my positive integers. To the left of 0, these are my negative integers. And when you're looking at your integers, the closer a negative number is to 0, the larger the number is. The closer a number is to 0, the larger a number is, okay? First thing we're going to do is we're going to graph on the number line. So we're going to graph some integers and their opposites now. So the instructions are graph the integers and their opposites on a number line. Now, I have said the word opposite. Well, the opposite of a -2 is a +2. They're opposites because they are the same distance from 0, but they are going in opposite directions. The opposite of a +4 is a -4. So this is example number 1. We're going to graph a -3, a +2, a -5, 1, 0, and 4. So we're going to do these on the number line. So I'm going to draw a number line. Now when you graph, you're going to put a solid dot on the number line, not above the number line, okay? So the first thing I want to do is graph a -3, so I'm going to put a dot on a -3. Then I want the opposite of that -3, and the opposite of a -3 is a +3, so I'm going to put a dot on the +3. I am following the instructions. Then I'll graph my +2, so I'll put a dot on a +2. The opposite of a +2 is a -2, so I need to put a dot on my -2. I'll put a dot on -5, and if you notice, I'm putting my dots on the number line. The opposite of a -5 is a +5. Graph 1, put a dot on 1, and the opposite of a +1 is a -1. The opposite of 0 is 0, so I put a dot on 0 and its opposite is 0. And then I have a 4, I'm going to put a dot on 4, and the opposite of 4 is a -4. So make sure that you always read the instructions and follow the instructions. Compare the integers. Use less than or greater than. This will be example 2. If I had a -6 and I want to compare it to 5. So I need to ask myself, is a -6 smaller than 5 or is it greater than 5? Well, all positive numbers are larger than negative numbers. So that -6 would be less than 5. Example 3. I have a -3 and I want to compare it to a -2. I want to compare it to a -3. Remember I said the closer a negative number is to 0, the larger it is. So you need to ask yourself, this -2 is closer to 0 than that -3 is, so that means that -2 is greater than that -3. Example 4. If I had a -15 and I want to compare it to a -9. I need to ask myself which one of these is closer to 0. This is closer to 0, so that means a -15 is smaller than that -9. Then we're going to take a look at what we call absolute value. 2 vertical bars. 2 vertical bars like that. That is called absolute value. If I put a number inside of it, this is read as the absolute value of -3. Now, I need to know what the absolute value of a -3 is. So if I use my number line, I will ask myself, how many units do I have on the number line from 0 to a -3, disregarding the direction? Well, there are 3 units from 0 to a -3, so that means the absolute value of a -3 would be a +3. So we're looking at the distance on the number line from 0 to that number, disregarding direction. So let's simplify. So if I had the absolute value of a -7, there are 7 units on the number line from 0 to a -7, so the absolute value of a -7 would be 7. Example 6, if I had the absolute value of 4, there are 4 units on the number line from 0 to 4, so the absolute value of 4 would be 4. If I had the absolute value of a -10, the absolute value of a -10 would be 10. But suppose I had a problem that looks like this. Remember, a dash has 3 different meanings. It means negative, it means opposite of, it means minus. So I read this as the opposite of the absolute value of a -8. So the absolute value of a -8 is 8. The opposite of it would be -8. Let's put some numbers in order from least to greatest. Order the integers from least to greatest. Example 9. If I had a -3, 2, -5, -6, and 5. So the instructions read from least to greatest. So I need to determine which one of these numbers is the smallest number. So in this set, that -6 is the smallest, so I'll start with the -6. Then I would have my -5, then -3, then +2, +5. Example 10. If I had a -7, -9, -2, 0, -5. Well, the smallest number up here is the -9. Then I have my -7. After that comes -5. Then my -2. Then 0. The next thing we're going to look at is adding and subtracting integers. So I'm going to look at adding first. So let's look at adding integers. I'm going to use a number line so that we can develop our rules, rather than just give you the rules. I want to prove to you how we come up with the rules. If I had a -4 plus 6, where if I were using the number line, my starting point is always going to be at 0. I need to add, I need to move over to a -4, so I'm going to move over 1, 2, 3, 4. It's asking me to add 6. So that means I need to go back in the positive direction 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And where I stop will be my answer. So I would get a positive 2. If I were illustrating this to draw it, I would put a bar above here. Then I would move to my left. Then I would come up above, go back over and stop. That is how I would illustrate that if I needed to illustrate it. On B, if I had 5 plus a negative 7. Again, my starting point is going to be at 0. I'm going to move to my right to that 5. It's asking me to add a negative 7, so I'm going to come back to my left 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I end up with a negative 2. Example C, if I had 3 plus a negative 3. Again, I'll start at 0, move to my right 3, come back to my left, 1, 2, 3. I get a 0 because these are opposites. Any number plus its opposite will give you 0. And if I had a negative 1 plus a negative 2, I will start at 0, move to my left 1, continue to move to my left 2 more, 1, 2, I end up with a negative 3. So let's see what happens as far as the rules. If you notice with these two problems, they had unlike signs. The rule is, if you're adding two numbers with unlike signs, you subtract the two numbers, your answer carries the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. Well, 6 has the greatest absolute value, is positive, that's why your answer is a positive 2. Here, these have unlike signs, so you subtract. This 7 has the greatest absolute value, it carries a negative sign, that's why your answer is a negative 2. Well, if I have two numbers that have the same sign, you add and keep the common sign. Now, I like to use money with students sometimes. I tell them if the number is positive, it's just like you have that much money. Negative, you spend that much. If you had $6, you spend $4. How much money would you have left? You would have $2 left. That's a positive 2. Let's say, on this particular problem, let's say you owe your best friend $7. You give them $5. Do you still owe them some money? Yes, you do. You owe them $2. That's why that is negative. Let's say you lost $1 this morning. You lose $2 this afternoon. How much money have you lost in all? You've lost $3. That's why that is a negative 3. Now let's say you started your day off and all you had was $3. You spend your $3. How much money do you have left at the end of the day? It would be 0. So let's do a few problems on adding. So let's find each sum. Example 1. If I had a negative 7 plus a negative 6, using the rule, these two numbers have the same sign, so I'm going to add them. 7 plus 6 gives me 13. I'm going to keep the common sign. The common sign is negative, so the answer is a negative 13. Example 2. If I had 14 plus a negative 7, these two numbers have unlike signs, so I'm going to subtract. 14 minus 7 gives me 7. 14 has the greatest absolute value, is positive. That's why the answer is positive. Example 3. If I had 35 plus a negative 50. Well, these two numbers have unlike signs, so I'm going to subtract first. When I subtract, I get 15. This number has the greatest absolute value. It carries a negative sign, so the answer is negative. Example 4. If I had a negative 9 plus 6, again, those have unlike signs. Subtract, I get a 3. The 9 has the greatest absolute value, so my answer would be a negative 3. Example 5, if I had a negative 13 plus a negative 6, these two numbers have the same sign, so I'm going to add. 13 plus 6 gives me 19. The common sign is negative, so my answer is a negative 19. Example 6, if I had a negative 8 plus 8, any number plus its opposite gives you 0. Example 7, if I had a negative 15 plus 24 plus a negative 9. Remember, let's combine two numbers at a time. If I had a negative 15 plus 24, these have unlike signs, subtract, I get a positive 9. Now I have 9 plus a negative 9. Remember, any number plus its opposite would give you 0. And our last example for addition, a negative 24 plus 7 plus a negative 3. A negative 24 plus 7, subtract the two numbers, you get 17. This number has the greatest absolute value. It carries a negative sign, so I have a negative 17 plus a negative 3. These two numbers have the same sign, so I'm going to combine them, get a 20. The common sign is negative, I get a negative 20. Now let's move to subtraction. The rule for subtraction is we're subtracting integers. The rule is to subtract a number add its opposite. So your backup system for subtraction, write the problem as an addition problem, okay? So let's find each difference. This will be example 1. 5 minus a negative 2. Well, 5 minus a negative 2 will give you a positive 7. Now, if you can't see that by looking at it, let's use the rule. The rule tells me to subtract that negative 2, add its opposite. The opposite of a negative 2 is a positive 2. That is how you get your 7. Example 2. A negative 3 minus 7, that would give you a negative 10. Again, if you can't look at it to get your answer, let's write it as an addition problem. The rule tells me to subtract that 7, add its opposite. The opposite of 7 is a negative 7. So both numbers are negative, combine them, you get 10, the common sign is negative. Example 3. A negative 1 minus a negative 8. I tell students sometimes 2 dashes right together, that immediately becomes plus. So that's a negative 1 plus 8. And a negative 1 plus 8 gives you a positive 7. So I will rewrite some of them as addition problems so that you can see it. If I had a negative 2 minus a negative 4, again, my answer would be 2. Well, how do I get 2? 2 dashes right together. That becomes a negative 2 plus 4. Example 5. For example 5, if I had a negative 3 minus 2. I also tell students if there's only one symbol before a number, that lets you know what type number it is. There's a dash there that makes that 3 negative, a dash here that makes the 2 negative. So I have a negative 3 and a negative 2, that gives me a negative 5. Again, if we can't see that, let's use the rule. The rule tells me to subtract that 2, add its opposite. Example 6. 8 minus a negative 8 gives me 16. Again, 2 dashes right together to subtract a negative 8, add its opposite, that's 8 plus 8. Example 7. A negative 31 minus 15. There's a dash in front of the 31, a dash in front of the 15, both are negative. I'm going to combine and get a negative 46. Again, if you can't see that, the rule tells me to subtract 15, add its opposite. The opposite of 15 is a negative 15. Example 8. 30 minus a negative 30. 30 minus a negative 30, that becomes 60. Because that is 30 plus 30. Example 9. A negative 20 minus a negative 4 would give you a negative 16. Well, using the rule, that's a negative 20. To subtract a negative 4, add its opposite, so that's plus 4. That is how you get your negative 16. Problem number 10, a negative 3 minus a negative 8. Yeah, my answer for this problem is 5. How do we get that? To subtract a negative 8, add its opposite. They have unlike signs, subtract, I get 5. The 8 has the greatest absolute value, it's positive, so that is how we get our positive 5. Example 11. 2 minus a negative 4 becomes 6. Again, 2 minus a negative 4. To subtract a negative 4, add its opposite. 2 plus 4 gives you 6. Example 12. 4 minus 7 is a negative 3. How do we get that? The rule tells me to subtract 7, add its opposite. The opposite of 7 is a negative 7. You owe your best friend $7, you give them 4, you still owe them some money. That's why that answer is a negative 3. And our last example is a negative 12 minus a negative 2. Your answer is a negative 10. How did we get that? Using our rule, to subtract a negative 2, add its opposite. The opposite of a negative 2 is a positive 2. You owe your friend $12, you give them 2, you still owe them some money, so that makes that 10 negative.